Another practical experiment I did that led on to my main project, because it was done right before production and thus just kind of flowed into it. Same with the drone research, was flowed straight into my project. I did set experiments with buildings that you could see in the scene. So the scene had a basic landscape, a mountainous landscape, with the city in the middle, or the town in the middle. That town then was a mining town, so it looked like it had refineries and other aspects to it, but none of it was overly detailed. These details were added by myself through just general interpretation. So the structure looked very curved towards where they narrowed. So I used pointed narrowed blocks to give that curve up. I wasn't able to get the full perspective through the scene since I was using the voxel system in-game to build the mountains, and the game restricts how big a voxel can be on a asteroid plane. So because I wanted to do this in space and not have to worry about the ships being pulled down by the gravity of a planet, because there are voxel-based planets which allow much bigger creations to be made, in the sense of cities and scapes, as well as mountains and other landscape choices. I didn't want them ships to be affected by gravity because, as I said in the drone research, mass blocks allow artificial gravity to affect your ship, but all blocks are affected by planetary gravity or moon gravity. So they will all fall towards the ground no matter what, even if they don't have mass blocks on them, if they're on a planet. I could have possibly done it on the moon, because the moon's already rocky as such and have much lower gravity, but the models I was using weren't actually designed to fly in any gravity whatsoever. They just weren't strong enough thruster-wise to fly in that condition, in those conditions, and thus I had to do it all in space, which meant I had to remodel a asteroid into a flat area. So I used the voxel tools that you are given in creative mode to flatten out the asteroid, remove everything that was unwanted or not needed, to save on frames and RAM, so that I could actually do this project. And then from there I added the basic buildings I designed in the first aspect, a few silos, a refinery tower, and a warehouse style build. The warehouse, everything on the scene seemed to have a red light on it, as if marking where it was in the darkness. So I added red lights to everything that stood out quite well. The only problem I encountered was the sun rotation, which you can disable, but I didn't in this world. So it wasn't until near the end, after I upgraded the buildings to a much more realistic style and a much more accurate representation of the refineries and other buildings, that I disabled sun rotation. The next problem after that I had to deal with was the sun was fixed at a point where the sun was coming onto the surface of the rock and set, which meant that it looked like bright daylight when in the scene it was pitch black darkness almost. So I had to build a giant wall to block the sun, which in turn took up a lot of frames and slowed down the game ever so slightly, because it had to render the giant shadow every single time. This didn't overall affect the results of my experiments too much. To build the upgraded buildings, I used the practical research I had already done into what assets can do. So the refineries got a nice green smoke coming out of them initially from damaged reactors, and fire from hydrogen engines that I had damaged, to give them that kind of burning refinery look that wasn't strictly in the scene, but I thought added a bit more depth. After pasting 6 or 7 of these in, the frames got a bit too much towards the red, so I removed quite a bit of these effects and simply added, I believe, one ACT reactor or just hydrogen engines to it. I believe actually I might have taken them all out, which led to being able to make a larger set without having to worry. Using the Bubble Shield mod that I mentioned before, I was able to make a dome shield around the planet, around the city, like there is in the scene from the Star Trek scene. This in turn resulted in a little bit more lag. It lagged ever so slightly every time something hit the shield, which is understandable since the game wasn't strictly made to handle that kind of physics. But the mod is very well optimized and is a testament to what the community can do when someone opens up their software for modding. With this mod is being used everywhere now. And that was all I did for set work initially. I carved mountains out of the voxel tool using squares and then triangles to cut into it and give it spikes. And I replicated as good as I could the scene and layout. The only problem I had was depth and scaling. I could have probably, using a smaller shield and then using smaller blocks, made a smaller version of the town, but this in turn would have also increased the amount of lag being experienced, since lots and lots of small blocks tends to lag the game quite a bit. Which is why I tried to use the Discovery as little as possible whilst recording stuff, since the Discovery itself is a lag machine in the game.